A lot of people are saying smart things, right? There's plenty of research, whether it's high quality research or maybe not, whether the methodology is sound or not. There's just a lot of people with very strong opinions, particularly in the world we live in today. And even if you get past the sort of just people spouting ideas and opinions to like really well-grounded research, a lot of that research nonetheless is confirmatory, right? It's really designed to either confirm what you already believe or to confirm what I already believe. And so it doesn't really add a lot to the discourse.
Our next Everything Thought Leadership interview is with someone I've been dying to meet for 13 years, Brent Adamson, co-author of the best-selling book, The Challenger Sale. Those of you in business-to-business sales might be well aware of this book. The Challenger Sale was an instant hit in 2011 when it came out among chief sales officers and their people at business-to-business companies that sell complex offerings. Challenger selling is the way thought leaders need to pitch their ideas when a potential client raises his hand and says, "I love your concept, now tell me how my company could adopt it." Brent and Matt published the book when they were both at Corporate Executive Board. Brent worked at CEB for 14 years and then 5 more after the Gartner acquisition. In our interview, Brent and I largely talk about what his one-time Gartner colleague, Maria Bolden, calls the last mile of thought leadership. That's the moment when a client has been so intrigued with a piece of thought leadership content that they ask to speak with a salesperson from the company that created the content. That person is often the thought leader herself or himself. We also talked about the far too messy process of thought leadership research. That included how to get the often fragile egos of an overloaded research team to recognize when there's more work to be done to create a compelling concept. Brent and I also talked about his career at CEB, an organization which I've admired for 25 years since it became a public company. Okay, Brent, it is great to have you on this show, Everything Thought Leadership. We have so many questions for you. We will probably run out of time before I've heard the answer to question number 3. So there we go.
That's only because I talk a lot, Bob, but it's great to see you. For what it's worth, I have lots of questions too, but they're about boring things like life and the meaning of it. But there you go. So it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay. There are many places we can begin, and I would like to begin back because the brand of Corporate Executive Board, CEB, is no longer around since Gartner bought CEB back in 2017. I would like you to start with your career at Corporate Executive Board. Things like, how did you learn about it? What was it like back in the early days when you were there? Although it had been in business for a number of years.
Yeah, it had. So let's see. We can come at it from 2 angles: sort of the history of the company and the history of me and how they intersect. But the thing about CEB, or the Corporate Executive Board, for those who don't know, it was a company, eventually a publicly traded company, that was ultimately bought by Gartner. What was it, 2018, 19, somewhere, 18 maybe. Yes, 17. Thank you. It's all a blur now, but anyway, everything pre-pandemic is like in the before times. But we had grown to just over $1 billion in top line revenue, so it was a pretty big publicly traded company. And our job, as we saw it, was to create what you would call thought leadership, to go out and across functional areas with head of sales, head of procurement, head of marketing, HR. We had research teams deployed against each of those different seats that surrounded the CEO, as we used to like to say. And our job was to go out every year and identify their most pressing issues, the biggest challenges, the biggest opportunities they were facing, and then study those challenges with both quantitative and qualitative research to get after a deeper understanding of what's root causing. If you root cause that challenge, where does the problem actually lie? As we used to say, if you penny out a solution, that is, if you take 100 pennies and distribute them across those root causes, which ones are actually the ones where you get the most leverage if you get after them? What would those solutions look like? How have companies begun to solve those already? We then profile those companies, and we take that entire thing, package it up in a story, and then we go out and present that story to what we called our members, because the model was that you bought a membership into this set of activities that gave you then access to the research, and we present it. So my job, I originally came into CEB in 2003. The company got its start as an outgrowth of a different company called the Advisory Board Company, which is still around, although now owned. They are no longer individually owned and operated. They're one of the big insurance companies bought them, but that was all. The Advisory Board Company, ABC, was specifically healthcare. So, and it still is. All of their work is in healthcare. And then someone on the team, long before I got there in the late 90s, said, we should do a research study on HR, like HR professionals inside of healthcare, or however it got started exactly. And then they stood up financial services, and then the momentum started rolling. It's like, hey, we could do one for corporate strategy and so on. And all of a sudden, someone woke up, I guess one day, said, "Hey, this is kind of its own standalone company. We should spin it out." Thus, CEB, or Corporate Executive Board, was born in Washington, D.C., because that's where the advisory board company was born.
The founder of both the Corporate Executive Board and the Advisory Board is a gentleman named David Bradley. Bradley launched a company that would later become known as the Advisory Board in 1979 with 5 employees. First, it focused on research on the financial services industry, and then it switched to the healthcare sector in 1986. Then 11 years later, in 1997, the Advisory Board spun off another corporate research group that was focused on industries outside of healthcare. This was the Corporate Executive Board. Both companies became publicly held firms in the 2000s. Each at their peak reached $1 billion in revenue and were highly profitable. And by the year 2017, both companies were sold to others. CEB was sold for $2.6 billion to Gartner, and the Advisory Board was sold for $2.5 billion to Vista Equity Partners and United Healthcare.
And that set it off on a journey. So I landed there, Bob, in 2003 after a 15-year career as an academic. So my background is I've got my PhD in applied linguistics and German. So I was a German professor of all things. And after about 2 years on my way to tenure on the tenure track at Michigan State University, I realized I was never going to make a lot of money doing this. And there's a question, you and I've talked a little bit in the past, but about sort of, who are you writing for, and who's the audience you're researching, who's ever going to see it, and what kind of impact is it going to have? And in academics, it's pretty limited. And so for a number of different reasons, I chose to get a business degree. So I got my MBA at the University of Michigan. So those paying attention closely at home, yes, I'm teaching during the day at Michigan State, and I'm studying at night at the University of Michigan. And the day my students found that out, they almost killed me. But so then, just one day I was just going through, it was in the recruiting office talking to different options, and it's a longer story here. It's not interesting, but I came across CEB, and CEB was, the way they talked about it, said, look, we research the heck out of stuff, and we go teach the heck out of stuff. And it's like, that's literally what I do. It took some convincing because I did all that, but I did it in German and linguistics. But they were open-minded enough to at least have a conversation, and that led to an opportunity. And so I went out to CEB and interviewed, and it just so happens, Bob, the research position that was open where there was the best fit and we hit it off the best was in the sales practice. It could have very easily been the learning and development practice for HR execs, or the recruitment practice, or the supply chain. And so for the last 20 years, I have been working on building a pretty deep expertise and incredible access to heads of sales. Eventually that grew, sort of broadened into head of marketing, sales, customer success, customer service. So anything kind of commercial. And that's where I've spent the last 20 years of my life is researching, writing, publishing, and teaching on those topics. And but by the way, the last thing I'd say real quick is is my job. What it eventually became my role at the company in the sales, particularly in the sales and marketing practices. Internally, we had a name. The title we used was headliner, which I never liked because it sounds arrogant. But the headliner role was to take. So if you've got a team of people, usually somewhere between 5 to 10, it a little depends on budgets and scale and all that kind of stuff, but they would spend the better part of about 8 months researching one of these topics, starting from what is the problem to all the way down this whole process we followed to come up with these insights and ideas and best practices. And as a headliner, my job was then to, I'd plug into that process along the way, but really towards the end of it, my job was to sit down and help the team turn that body of research, this sort of very incredible, but still a little bit maybe amorphous. That's maybe a little unfair, but it wasn't a story. It was results. And the question we had to figure is, how do we take results and turn them into a compelling story with language and metaphor and presentation skills? And so I would literally write a script. So I, as with the other headliners, because the whole idea of quality control is about thought leadership, right? Is that, and when the first time I heard them say script, I said, when you say script, what do you mean, like script? They said, no, we mean script, like verbatim, word for word. If you were to take 8 hours in a day-long retreat, present this research to a group of heads of whatever, sales, what are the words you'd say? So they were about 25,000 words. I'd knock them out in about 10 days. Some of my colleagues could do it a lot faster. And then that script would be distributed to other content deliverers, as we used to call them. And our job would be to travel all over the world and present the findings to executives in what we called retreats or meetings, and one-off, workshops and you name it. So it was So towards the end, I was on the back end of production and then distribution, I guess is how you'd say that. But well, actually one more thing, because this is actually something we should talk about. The thing though that made it different to me was the DNA of the research project, because the research that we strove to create was new to world ideas that no one ever thought of before, that were specifically designed to reframe your thinking. That's how we were all trained. So for the people in the sales world who may have bumped into the book that came out of some of this, were called the Challenger Sale that we wrote, and the Challenger Customer, particularly the Challenger Customer is the second of the two Challenger books. That book, honestly, is a step-by-step instruction manual on how we did research at CEB. It's all about understanding the status quo, understanding what's the underappreciated insight that no one's fully understood, coming up with enough evidence to show that that alternate perspective is compelling and sufficiently to take action on, and then building a case for action and then making it tactical so you know what to actually do. So it was all about what we call disagreement research. Everything we did that was our term internally, was we build disagreement research. So it was literally our job, as we saw it every morning, was to wake up and disagree with the world. I just can't think of a better place to be. It was perfect.
I think that's so important, to be able to say something fundamentally new, something that nobody else has said, because just about on most management topics, there has been a ton of research done over the years, much of it good, much of it groundbreaking. But if you're coming to market and saying something that's a little incrementally different than what so-and-so has said, it seems to me you're not going to get much traction in the marketplace.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Particularly in today's world, where there's a longer story we can unpack here, but everybody's saying smart things. Not everybody. A lot of people are saying smart things, right? There's plenty of research, whether it's high quality research or maybe not, whether the methodology is sound or not. There's just a lot of people with very strong opinions, particularly in the world we live in today. And even if you get past the sort of just people spouting ideas and opinions to like really well grounded research, a lot of that research nonetheless is confirmatory, right? It's really designed to either confirm what you already believe or to confirm what I already believe. And so it doesn't really add a lot to the discourse in terms of getting people to say, for me, the litmus test was always, it still is today, and everything I do, the content that I want to produce is content to get you to say, I never thought about it that way before. And if I can't get you to say I never thought about that way before, in my mind, I failed. And that's a pretty high bar. But when it happens, it's magical. Because, by the way, if I can get you to say I've never thought that way before, chances are pretty good that 6 months earlier, I said to myself, I've never thought about it that way before. Because that's what I geek out on. I just get so excited about things that make your own brain go, ooh, I got to rewire this. I got to think about this differently. That's why I love talking to lots of different people and diverse experiences and diverse people, because anything in my life that gets me to say, I never thought about it that way before, to me, sounds exciting and intriguing. To other people, it sounds threatening and awful, I suppose, but there you go.
So it would be fair to say that when you and your team at CEB came up with the big aha, like we didn't even think about this going in. It was not one of our original hypotheses. And boy, we've discovered this island on this topic that nobody else has discovered.
Totally.
That's a good place to be. It can also be a very precarious place to be, because people are going to take pot shots at it, right? Unless we have the proof to say the sky is really black, not blue, right? It's a nice idea, but
I totally agree. So by the way, it's like, so I'm just a contrarian at heart, right? So if you tell me to zig, I'll do neither. So I'm always looking for that third way out, the different perspective. And it's like, and it's funny you should say it, because I tell people all the time, you tell me the sky's blue, I will get in an argument with you, but it's every color but blue, just because. And by the way, just so, not because I just like to be cantankerous and argumentative, although maybe my wife would disagree. It's because I like to learn. And so in other words, if you said the sky is blue and I took the opposite position and said, no, it's every color but blue, it's because I want to hear your position. And I kind of want you to win. Do you know what I mean? I'm on this quest for better certainty, a little bit more knowledge. But the only way to do that is to create an irritant, so that you ultimately creating a pearl of wisdom. Look at what I did there as a fun metaphor. But so you got to engage in this kind of contrast. You've got to engage in this dissonance, in this smashing of ideas together. And you've got to be willing to live in that discomfort to kind of find a place that gets you to a bigger idea. And a lot of people don't like that, because it's hard and it's exhausting and it's frustrating and it's uncertain and it's unsettling. But that's the world I've lived in. And so, to your point, we spent a lot of time. If you're going to go out and make a business out of reframing people's thinking, you better come to you better come to the gunfight with a gun. Sorry for the martial metaphor, right? But so we talked a lot about the burden of proof. And so the simple rule is this: the higher order, the bigger the disagreement, the higher the burden of proof, which makes sense, right? And the burden of proof, and eventually where CEB got, right about the time I got there, we just started to make this transition from qualitative to quantitative. And as we built our quantitative research muscle, the numbers, data, the burden, our ability to rise to higher levels of disagreement rose significantly. And because we could say, look, we've got the data, and this is what people love the challenger work, is because you guys are the only ones who ever put data on the table for this. And this is where my chops as a researcher in all those years as training to be an academic came in to be important. And my co-author, Matt Dixon, who's also a PhD, his PhD is in economics. When you get a PhD, you're trained in research methodology. So if you're going to go to the world and argue a case and say it's because of the data, then what's going to happen next is you're going to get in an argument with some people, at least, about the quality of your methodology. So then you've got to be able to back that up, and you've got to be able to engage on a methodological approach. The thing that I think is interesting, Bob, I would love to talk to you about, is that everything I just laid out is hard. And it's, you know what is even more importantly, it's expensive. And this is why the CEB model worked, is because we took because to create one of those studies, if you go all in on budget, we did this once, and I have colleagues who actually ran the business side of this. And so they own those budgets every year, and they tell you this. But one of those projects alone is somewhere between $700,000 to just over $1 million. And nobody wants to spend that kind of money. So the only way that you can really do that is to take that cost and essentially spread it out over lots of people, right? So syndicate it. So we do that in academics. This is why professors can do what they do, is because we take the cost of that really, really expensive research and we break it out over millions and millions of people called taxpayers, right? So the way we did at CEB is we took that cost and broke it down into, I don't know, roughly $30,000 to $60,000 increments and spread it out over lots of different companies. But if this is one of the struggles I have today, to try to do this on your own is really, really hard, because you can't walk up to someone and go, I've actually tried, it didn't work. It's like, yeah, do you have $700,000? I'd love to go study this thing. So it takes a lot of time to find enough people to pool their resources to fund it, which then means you've got to find someone who's willing to go find the people to pool their resources and manage the people and make sure that they're happy. That's called account management and sales. And all of a sudden now you've got a business. And it's like, I just kind of want to go study stuff. But this is why I think this doesn't get done nearly as much as maybe it could or should, is because it's expensive.
So back in my days at CSC Index, from 87 to 97, we had a research program with Michael Hammer, God rest his soul, the father of business reengineering. And that research program, co-owned by CSC Index and Michael Hammer, at the peak had about 120 corporate sponsors, IBM, Ford, other Fortune 500 companies from around the world, paying about $30,000 each to belong. So you do the math, it's a $3 million program every year, and doing 3 to 4 research studies a year. I look at that as, well, that is client-funded thought leadership research. That business did not make a lot of money for CSC Index, or probably made more money for Michael Hammer than for CSC consulting firm, but it was not, neither party was losing money by doing that research. In fact, they didn't even have to do consulting to make up for the cost of this best practice research. So at CEB, let's say for the sales group, the group that did research on best practices in sales, the economics there, roughly how many clients were funding that research every year back then, and what were they paying? Yeah,
because I was in a producer role as opposed to a manager role. I didn't have, so here's a rough estimate. So the HR practice by far was our biggest. It is also our oldest. So it had thousands of heads of HR all over the world. The sales practice, marketing practice, I think they usually ran at our high water mark. I think we're about 450, 500. It's probably a little bit, maybe up to 700. 2008, we took a haircut like everybody else did. So, everybody looked at their budgets, particularly when a company's like, oh, I've got this $30,000 investment in membership to the sales executive council, is what the sales practice is called. It's like, that didn't look like a lot. But all of a sudden they realized, wait, that sales executive council and that procurement leadership circle and the marketing leadership roundtable and all these other crazy names we'd come up with, that's all the same company. And then all of a sudden they realized, we're not spending $30,000 with this company. We're spending $3 million with this company. And in 2008, that was not a good place to be, right? So everybody took a haircut. I mean, you remember 2008. That was tough for everybody. But that's also where we were doing our best research, because the pain that companies were feeling was the greatest, was the most acute, and the help they needed was the highest. The level of help that they need was highest. So in some ways, it was our time to shine. Is as we took a haircut. But in the salad days, because once you cover, of course, your fixed costs, each incremental member becomes gravy, right? I mean, this is basic economics. I'm not teaching anyone anything they don't know, right? So that was always the goal, is to drive up new members, and then of course renew members at a, we used to call it the road to 90. How can we get to 90% renewal rate? We never quite got there, but in a good year, we'd renew easily over 70. And that was all based on the quality and, more importantly, the relevance of the work that we were doing. So relevance was critically important. But the thing is that this kind of was saying before is like, but as you get bigger, the costs go up, because now you need an account management team to make sure that all those members are happy and that they're getting research and they're using what they bought. We had a customer success team long before there was ever anything called customer success, because we had to make sure that they were actually using that which they had access to, the webinars, the content, the retreats, the meetings, and constantly having to remind them, hey, don't forget there's this thing. And remember, you wanted it. And we talked about you wanting it. And now you got to use it. And so it was always, and we sold on an enterprise level, not a seat level. So when a company, or at least a division of a company, bought access, they bought it for their entire team. One of the big shifts when Gartner took over in 2017 is Gartner sells on a seat-based model. So they sell a membership to an individual rather than to an organization. And those, strangely enough, while that may sound like a small difference, the economics of that model are completely different in a lot of ways. But it all comes back to, marginal cost and marginal return and the margins. But one way or another, when you get lots of humans involved creating sort of almost like artisanal research like we did at CEB, well, again, we did very well as a company. The margins were horrible relative to like a software company. They could just stamp out with no incremental cost, stamp out more and more product. It's just that. So for a lot of people, the business is just not, the economics of the business aren't super attractive. For people like you and me, the business is super attractive because we geek out on that kind of work. We think it's important and we think it's exciting. But if I'm a shareholder, I think, why would I do this for that return when I can go over here and do something with AI and software for 10x the return? So that's anyone starting a company like that today is facing an uphill battle.
Nonetheless, I remember looking at the financial reports of both the corporate executive board in the 2000s and Gartner and the sister company, the advisory board. They held companies both doing, I think, over $1 billion in revenue a year, and with profit margins in the good years of 15% net after tax.
Yeah.
And so these were, solidly profitable business. Were they going from whatever, $10 million to $30 billion like Salesforce over? No, from 0 to $1 billion in X number of years. But they were still solidly profitable businesses.
Well, again, as an investor, though, if I can get that kind of return, or I can go into the SaaS space, particularly in the time of blitz scaling, and the crazy times that we just went through, it's like sort of pandemic and just directly post pandemic, where the returns are just astronomical. And of course, now with AI, it's like shiny object versus my dad's Buick, right? And at least in terms of the economics, these research organizations look like my dad's Buick. So it's like, what's wrong with my dad's Buick? It's a nice car. It's like, but if I'm an investor, it's like, no, I want a Lamborghini, and that's over here. So it's real challenge finding, which is a shame. And by the way, this is why, if you really believe in the quality of this kind of research, it's kind of become like the classic sort of idea of a public good. It's like something that we all benefit from, but no one's willing to actually put in the money in terms of the market and supply and demand. There's less desire to prop up the supply given the cost than the demand, or at least the need for the need for it. And so this is why you find that the best research still is done in universities, because of the economics. It's really expensive, and the return is long term and sometimes unclear and sometimes not there at all, right? It's like, if I do a survey, if I do a $10 million research project in bio whatever, and then it turns out that I didn't find anything, my hypotheses are all blown. It's like, I could look at that and say, well, I just wasted my money. An academic would look at that and say, that was money well spent, because we learned what doesn't work. But as an investor, I look at this and say, I've got nothing to monetize on the back end. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's just tricky.
I look at it differently, though. At CC Index. Yeah. So this research program that Index owned with Michael Hammer, $3 million at its peak, 93, $3 million a year in revenue. Well, Index, the consulting firm's revenue went from in 1987 when I joined it, 40 million a year to 8 years later, 95, 200 million.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was on the back of that thought leadership research, that
Yeah.
$3 million a year research program with Michael Hammer at its peak. 3 million drove 40 to 200 million.
Yeah.
And so the research program itself was not very profitable
Yeah.
for the consulting firm, but it was the fuel of service
100%.
consulting
Yeah.
certification. And so if you look at it just as a standalone research business itself, maybe it's not, it's not as sexy, as it's not going to generate shareholder returns at a SaaS company, as you pointed out, but it can sure help grow a professional services.
I'm with you. So you're preaching to the choir. And so I have long thought, but at least for the last 5, 6, 7 years, wouldn't it be cool to set up a CEB-esque like research team and do the kind of work that we did, but do it in the context of almost like, Xerox PARC or ATT Labs, right? So it's attach yourself to a company that can absorb the hit to the margin because it's just a blip on their radar screen, but you're spitting out research and insight that is so valuable first to that company and then ultimately, hopefully, to the world. And that's exactly what, first order blank sheet of paper research was at AT&T and Xerox PARC. And those really incredible engineering-based research labs that seem to have largely gone by the wayside. If anyone's out there listening, sign me up for like being part of that, because I think it'd be really cool to, and not just cool, like let's do something that's cool, but I think the economics would then make sense, and I think the impact could be huge for that company. But as it stands right now, Bob, I had someone approach me a while ago saying, that thing you did with Challenger, where you took this like one insight and turned it into a series of books, which launched a $60 million a year business, which has made careers and has made a whole lot of people other than me a whole lot of money. That sounded bitter. I didn't mean it to sound bitter. That was when you write research for other people, you don't own the research. That's just the way the game works. And so I knew that going in. But nonetheless, you had this huge impact, right? And so people come to me now and say, can you do that thing again? And it's like, I don't know, because that was lightning in a bottle, but we could certainly try. I know the steps and the muscles that it takes to increase the likelihood of that happening. But one, I can't guarantee it. But two, someone came to me and said, can you do that? So we put a proposal together. We had a project we think would lead to those kinds of insights as a colleague of mine. And we put a budget together, and the budget was $800,000. He literally looked at us and said, what can I get for $100,000? And I said, well, not that. And I wasn't trying to be rude, but I said, it's just, if you're going to generate new to the world insight, this is what it takes. And he said, yeah, but Brent, you already have so much insight. You've got all this cutting room floor stuff that you never published. Can you maybe just talk about that? And it's like, you know what I mean, Bob? It's like at that point, we're just like Mars and Venus. It wasn't wrong to want it, but it's just not the same thing. So anyway.
Well, this gets to another topic, but the other topic is, well, how do we get 10, 20 companies, in my mind, how do we get 10, 20 companies to fund this $800,000 research?
Yeah.
800,000 divided by 20 companies. How do we get them to fund it so that the research is not a cost, it's maybe break even?
Totally.
We're using these companies to actually research the topic. We're asking these companies, 20 companies, how are they handling this topic at hand?
Yeah, and it takes a while to get that flywheel going. And it takes one or two to commit to it. This is one of my 2 projects I'm working on now, is essentially to get this kind of flywheel going again. But it's got to start. It's like a chicken and egg problem. Either someone's got to be willing to give you a bunch of money to go do the research, hoping that you come up with something, or you've got to have an idea that's sufficiently strong enough that you already got, that you can put a story around that eventually can create that kind of interest. My good friend and co-author on the Challenger work, Matt Dixon, he's well on his way to. They've got a company called DCM Insights. DCM is the initials of the last names of the 3 founders, Dixon and McKenna and Channer. But they now, through just a set of circumstances that Matt was where he was at the right time in the right place, and because of his scrappiness and hard work and just incredible business acumen, he was able to find and create an environment where he got funding to do this kind of research that became what's a book called The Jolt Effect, which he published, which then led to the found, like someone says, wow, do that for me. Here's some more money. And all of a sudden now he's got a flywheel. He's hiring people, and he's slowly but surely building something like this for at least the space of partner networks. I'm doing something, I'm trying to do something very similar. I've got this body of research. I'm writing a book right now. We hope that book will eventually come to a place that we can monetize it sufficiently, not to pay the bills and all that, but actually to fund the next research project. And if I can use If we can publish and do some training and some consulting off the back of that, that creates some money. That money that can be funneled into the next project, and and so on. But it's hard. It's just hard to. It's like starting your car in the Midwest in 1972 on a cold winter day. It's just really, really hard to get the thing going. But once you get it going, then you've made some momentum. The only problem with that, Bob, is I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah,
It takes time, and I'm an old man.
Yeah, I'm older than you, so I'm certainly not getting any younger. If you were to be asked, well, so how would you sum up the keys to the success, the enormous success of corporate executive board? I mean, it's sold for multiple times revenue to Gartner in 2017, and the advisory board. So my perception is they both use the same research model. The advisory board is focused on healthcare, and CEB focused on everything else. So, what were the keys to success of these $1 billion plus highly profitable publicly held companies for a time?
That's a really good question. I think if you ask different people, you get different answers. If you ask me, I would tell you essentially what I just told you across our conversation, which is it was the quality and the design of our research. I'd like to believe that we were one of the few shops that was creating anything quite like that. I call it the jazz age, really, is that you sit in a room with 6 incredibly smart people and debate the heck out of an idea just so you can burnish into a diamond and go to the world, your people being your clients, your members, and say, very diplomatically, I think you're wrong. And here's a different way to look at it. That's incredibly valuable. What we eventually found is, though, that it's, the curve has a diminishing return on growth because there's a subset of executives out there who absolutely value that kind of insight, absolutely value that kind of research and want it and will pay for it. And that can get you to about a $350,000, $400,000 business. At some point, if you want to go from 400 or 500 up to a billion, 500 million up to a billion in revenue, all of a sudden you start bumping into companies say, I just want to know what to do. Just tell me, they're much more, we call them the doer community. They didn't want these breakthrough insights. They I've got this thing. Can you just do this for me? Or I don't want that big idea. I'm just trying to do this one little tactical thing in front of me. We look and say, that's not interesting. The better thing for you to do is that, but they didn't want to know that. You know what I mean? So the company, it would reach a ceiling of growth. And so then you start getting into, all right, so we'll create research for the doer community, as we used to call it, and like just real tactical stuff. And then it becomes hard. And so then you start thinking, like, what else can we acquire, or what other practices can we launch? And you start looking for other growth opportunities. At some point you kind of run out of steam a little bit and so then you have to decide, am I okay with that? Am I okay being a $350,000, $400,000 company? Am I okay with this size membership? Am I okay with not growing and just being stable and pulling in margins and just farming this thing? And if you're a publicly traded company, the answer is almost inevitably going to be no, you can't be okay with that because you have to drive a return for your shareholders. And so then you start making decisions about who else can I acquire? What else can I do? And all of a sudden you find just over time, you start losing your way a little bit. You start losing your focus. And all of a sudden, well, you get acquired. That sounds a little unfair to CEB, but there's a little bit of what happened, right? Is that there was so much pressure to keep growing because we were a publicly traded company that it constantly put this underlying core model of how we did research under pressure to do it faster, do it leaner, do it quicker. And eventually when Gartner came in and took over, Gartner's just got a different way of looking at it. Gartner's a $5 billion company. And what they found is the way that you generate insight at that level of scale is you just process the heck out of it. So they run I used to tell people, and working at Gartner for 4 years as I did, I feel like a jazz musician playing in a marching band. And I'll tell you, if you like John Philip Sousa, that's not a criticism. Then you're in pig and slop. You're the happiest person in the world because that's like the Texas A&M marching band. That thing is precision, right? But if you want to just hang out with people and bounce ideas off the wall at 11 o'clock at night with the room smelling like Chinese food because you got takeout for the 5th night in a row, and you're just getting these really aggressive arguments that are never about the people but always about the idea. This is the first thing we always had to do about when we brought new people on the team is we had to say, look, it's going to get a little heated in here. You have to understand it's not about you. And a lot of people couldn't handle it because that's the wrong way to put it. A lot of people were very uncomfortable with that because they felt like when I attack your idea, I'm attacking you. And they had a hard time separating the cognitive versus the personal, which is really hard. It takes years to get at this because what we ultimately had, you didn't ask this, but if I throw this on the table, if I may, the thing that made this work in the end and why I miss it so much is because what we had as a team was trust. And it was a deepest level of personal trust. We didn't always love each other. Heck, sometimes we didn't even like each other, but we'd go into these rooms, Bob, and we would argue because we knew that that's how you create diamonds, and you had to put everything under pressure. And we'd walk out of there and we'd still at least be able to talk to each other most of the time. And it would get pretty heated sometimes, but you had to separate the personal from the process. And that was my job. My job was essentially, I was a professional devil's advocate. I'd have a team, and I used to be on the other side as a researcher when I first started. But you imagine, it's like you've got a team sometimes of 20 somethings, right? Particularly towards the end, who've just spent the better part of 6 months pouring their heart and soul into this idea. And they're trying to get promoted. They're trying to feed their young family. There's a lot on the line personally, and they're trying to get more recognition. They're trying to climb the ladder. They're trying to show that they're good at what we do. And then they bring these ideas to these meetings we call checkpoint meetings. And my job was to just put it bluntly, to tear the idea down, to find its holes, to dismantle it. Because if I didn't do it, it was going to happen out in the marketplace with our clients, which was a disaster, right? So, and it took me years to figure out how to do that without doing collateral damage to the person. That is so hard. And I'm the first one to raise my hand. I didn't always get it right. And I live with that today. But what I learned is very early on, particularly with people new to this, whether they're young or not young, didn't matter. But the people who knew this, I tried to sit down very transparently, explain to them how this works, how it works, why it works that way, what we're trying to do. If you hear me say this, this is what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'm not trying to do. And not everyone could wrap their brain around it, but the people that did, we would get to this place where we just had so much, and they would, by the way, they'd attack me too. And that's what I want. Like, again, you come to me with sky is blue and I come at you with the sky is every color but blue. I don't want you to give in. If you give in, I've lost. I want you to win. Do you know what I mean? But I'm going to make you win. And that was my goal. Is like these researcher companies, like, I want nothing more than you to win this argument, but I am going to make you work so hard for it. And that was my job. And you can only do that if you have to like each other, but you have to trust each other. Sorry, you got me all reminiscing now. That makes sense. Do you buy that?
It does. It does. What were the key, if you had to boil it down to say three things, keys to not, because I've been in these kind of research meetings. If you say something a certain way, you can wind up silencing somebody because they have been, this big idea they thought they had, you just stepped on it. You know? What are the keys to not stepping on somebody's ideas, but moving it in a much better direction and having them not kind of, intellectually out, but help move their idea?
What I found, because what we're really talking about here is human interaction, right? So the same principles that apply here apply in marriage and friendship and others. Like, how can you engage in a debate about ideas without feeling like you're engaging in a personal argument with each other? It's like, if I could figure this out, I guess I'm still married after 30 years, so I've got a little bit of it, but and I'm married to a German who loves to argue. So I find, for at least in these research things, the way you use pronouns, for example, becomes really important. I mean, like really subtle stuff like this, right? It gets into, like, I'm not an NLP guy, a neuro-linguistic programming guy at all. I'm still not sure how I feel about NLP because it's got this weird manipulative aspect to it that's kind of creepy and scary, but it kind of works at the same time, right? So, like, the way you say things, as opposed to, what you said was, as opposed to, well, I hear what you're saying. One could say this, but one could also say that. You know what I mean? So it's again, trying everything you can with the language, with the phrasing, with the tone, with the body language to make it about the idea. And sometimes you just have to just stop, say, remember, it's just about the idea. I love what you said. I love that and so I'd often start with just credit. The fact that you get where we are right now is because you busted your butt for the last 6 years or 6 months to get us here. And we're about to have a debate that we could only have because you killed it. Now let's have the debate. You know what I mean? It's like, just make sure that people feel seen and affirmed and appreciated, and then go after it. And they understand the rules of the game. I keep, as I get older, I'm 55 now, I find that the one thing we all crave more than anything else in life as humans is affirmation. And when I go after your idea, if it feels like I'm going after you as a person, that's the opposite of affirmation. So I tried to separate those two. Let me affirm you as a person. You are amazing, incredible. And by the way, when you say this, you got to mean it. And I always meant it because I appreciated the hell these incredibly smart people that busted their butts to do this. Because I used to do it too. And it's like, all right, now we got that out of the way. Lots of love. Okay, good. Lots of love. Great. All right, now about this idea, and then we go after it, But and then I try to end the meeting with the same thing, we made a lot of progress. Here's where we started. Here's where we ended. Here's why we ended this way. Here's why this better place that was my idea and your idea, 1 + 1 = 3. Let's summarize it. But again, just a reminder, none of this could have happened if you had not done the work you did. And that's so appreciated. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. It didn't resonate with everybody. Some people would see it as cynical, but I always meant it. I really did.
I think it's, I've seen it in the way I've interacted with people over the years, and I haven't interacted with them, in all the right ways either. I had to learn by doing things wrong. One of the key things I think I've learned about this, not attacking somebody for some idea they have and they're excited about, but I'm not so excited about, is to say something along the lines of, listen, there are no dumb ideas. There are only insufficiently developed ideas.
Yeah.
You look at ideas on a spectrum of 0% developed to 100%, and you'll never be 100% developed.
Yeah.
You say, look, I think your idea on the spectrum of development of the idea is like at 20%, 30%. You may think it's at 80, 90%, but right now I think it's more on this side for this and that reason. I think you can move it this way, but you've got to do this, and this to make this idea kind of hold water. And be novel, be supported by evidence, be clear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, has helped kind of diffuse this notion of, well, Bob thinks that the idea is dumb, and so I don't think the idea is dumb. I don't like to get into those conversations with people.
The other thing, Bob, I found is that in these debates we'd have, because it would get agitated sometimes, there'd be some cuss words thrown, and it would unfortunately get a little personal every once in a while, even including with me. And I found as you do the postmortem on like, why did that spin out of control, or why did I get so upset? I found that more often than not, it was based on effort. I was just tired, not just tired like I didn't get enough sleep that night, but tired of like, I see where we are. I see where this needs to go. I see how you're pushing back, or I see the evidence that we need that we don't have. And you just like, I don't know how to get there. I don't know how to get you there. I don't know how to get me there. And you just get frustrated, and you just get cognitively exhausted, and you just get worn out. And it's like, I used to tell my colleagues, every single study we ever did, we're going to the dark place. And there's going to be a moment where we're all going to say, this thing's broken. We just spent 6 years or 6 months on nothing. And at that point, when the exhaustion hits, people say, just power through. Sometimes it's better just go home, just take a time off, just get some rest, come back, look at it with fresh eyes. But I found that, like you and I, like at some point, if I'm trying to get you to the sky as anything but blue, and you're digging in with blue, and we just wind up saying the same things over and over and over again, and we're not making any progress, that's when I get frustrated. And then it's either I'm not making progress coming to your side, you're not making progress to come to my side, and we're just restating things. That's kind of like where politics is right now in the United States, right? And that's why we all feel so exhausted. I think it's because it's not that we don't mind, it's not that we hate having a discourse where we're debating. It's just that we're exhausted because we're having a discourse that's exhausting, that we're not seeing any progress on. I'll throw my heart and soul into debate if it feels like somehow we're getting to a better place. But if we're just spinning our wheels, that's when people start to detach.
And get personal at that point, right?
100%. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's put CEB behind us.
Okay.
I could talk all morning.
That's so fascinating. I miss that world. Yep.
It was such an incredible company. So where are you today? You and Matt Dixon are the gurus of the Challenger sale and everything that's evolved around that and beyond it. Where are you going today? Where do you want to go?
So I've got 2 big projects I'm working on now. I'm self-employed as of about 6 months ago, out on my own, at least for the time being, until the money runs out. So I've got a window that I've got to, I'm 55. I should be worried about money this much. And nonetheless, here we are, right? So I've got a little bit of time, and the 2 companies, one I'll come to is kind of, I mentioned before, is kind of what we're talking about today. The other one is a software company. So it's a using a lot of AI and a lot of software and just really great design work and all the knowledge. Work with a couple other people to build a company that takes training and boils it down into micro bursts of learning and deploys that learning into the flow of work. And we're starting with sales content because that's the expertise that I have. But if you could imagine, if I could take sales training instead of take it out of the classroom where it's once and done and no one remembers anything, and actually put it in these little micro bursts of content right in front of a seller, right at that time they need it in the flow of work, we believe that would be pretty powerful. So cues and prompts, we call the company cues. So we're working on that right now. If anyone wants to invest, let me know because we need some money. But that's a lot of work. And then at the same time, there's a body of work that I was involved in producing with lots of really smart colleagues at late CEB, mostly at Gartner, that continues, I find, to coalesce in my mind around this bigger set of ideas and pulling in research from other places and looking at this from a higher level that I didn't have the luxury to do when I was still at Gartner. It's become pretty clear to me that this is a body of work on sales and marketing that has potential for a huge impact. And that's ultimately what led me to leave a great job with a great company, making pretty great money. But is to say, I want to spend the next 8 months or so writing that book. And then long term, that goal is so that the software company is like, let's build it, let's make something amazing, let's get it out into the world, and let's send it on its way, right? Put it where it belongs in whatever company it belongs in. But this is the life's work of how can I essentially recreate that magic that you and I just spent all that time talking about. It's like, how can I want to, I'm at that age in my life where a lot of us are when you hit this, in your 50s, like, I just want to do cool things with cool people. That's it. And if I can do cool things with cool people that have a lasting positive impact on the world that helps us all just understand things a little bit better, that's what I want to do. So it starts with, and that's how I'm trying my freaking hardest to get this flywheel going that we talked about before. We'll start with a book. Hopefully we can use that book to do some keynotes and some training and some workshops that will take that money. We'll just pour it right back into the next research project, which create the next set of IP and so on and so forth, and get a band together, partly old band, partly new band, and build the kind of thought leader. Because when you're small, this goes back to the margins question we discussed at length already. I don't need to build $1 billion company and answer to publicly traded shareholders. I just, if I could pay the bills, but produce research that changes people's lives materially, because I've had a taste of it and I kind of want it again. So stay tuned. That's what I'm working on. If that sounds interesting to anybody who wants to get involved, let me know. Particularly, again, need funding. Everything I'm doing right now needs funding. It's so hard.
Isn't that funny? Right?
Oh my God, it's so frustrating. Things cost money.
Maybe let's end this with, and I really appreciate your time, Brent.
Oh, it's so fun.
You had mentioned you'd love to talk about the 3 ways that thought leadership go. So I am all ears.
I wrote it down. It's actually now 4, by the way. So so this is partly some of the stuff I've been talking about, but it's so Bob, it's funny because you and I have a mutual friend, a colleague, in your case, family member, Maria Bolden, who we both dearly love. And when she first told me, I know this guy is Bob. He's built this thought leadership company. He said, thought leadership. Because in the Challenger customer, the second of the Challenger books, we spend a great deal of time differentiating between what we call thought leadership and insight. I think you and I, because we're pretty like-minded, if I lay this out, I totally agree. But what it comes down to is a definitional problem, because here's how I first encountered thought leadership, largest back in, say, 2008, 9, 10. It was a global general manager of a huge company, global company, Fortune, 15, 20, that you would know. And we were talking about the Challenger work that we're rolling out. And he looked at me and said, he was kind of dismissive of the whole thing. He said, Brent, here's what I need. Here's what I want. I just need us to be a thought leader, because if we can be a thought leader, then we can demonstrate to the world that we have cutting edge ideas that are far out in front of everyone else, that we're smarter, that we're better, and that's going to build trust. And our companies are more likely to trust us, and they're likely to come to us first with their mission critical priorities and their tough challenges. And so we're going to invest heavily on thought leadership. And it was right about that time when content marketing was coming up and everything was all about thought leadership. And my reaction was like, I don't know if that's going to get you what you think. So here's my take. So 4 ways in which thought leadership. So when I'm reacting to thought leadership, it's that definition of thought leadership that I'm reacting to. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of conventional definition of thought leadership. So number 1 is that, at least that definition of thought leadership is deeply supplier centric, right? So it's solving for really one thing. It's solving for customers' perceptions of us, right? How do you think about us? Do you think I'm smart? Do you think I'm pretty? Do you like me? Right? It's kind of like dating in high school, right? It's like, I don't really know what your problem is per se. I mean, to do good thought leadership, for it to resonate, get consumed, it's got to be kind of relevant to you. But the underlying goal, the only reason you're really doing it is to change customers' perception of you. So I think that becomes problematic for reasons we'll get into. The second thing is, most thought leadership, again, according to this definition I've laid out, is largely designed to simply, as a result, demonstrate smartness. It's like, look at all these things that we know. We did research, we've got data. And so look at this interesting idea, or look at the 5 reasons why you should do this, or the 2 things about that. But the Challenger work that we did is all based on a different idea, which is, if we're going to sell, if we're going to grow, if we're going to expand, we have to sell more, but we all sell the same thing. What we sell is change. One way or another, every company sells change. So either I want you to stop buying this, start buying that, stop buying from them, start buying from us, stop buying the small amount, start buying this big amount, or stop using our old technology, start using our new technology. One or another, we're trying to get our customers to change their behavior. What's the one thing customers will want to avoid at all costs? Change, right? It's hard, it's risky, it's expensive, it's unknown. And so if we start thinking about our job is to help customers or get customers to want to change their behavior, then you start thinking about, what kind of content do I need to put in front of them that's going to drive change? And that can't just be content that says, oh, you're smart, right? So it's like, what company wakes up and says, man, you guys are so smart, take my money, right? It doesn't work that way. It's like, so if a company's going to give you their money, you've got to have convinced them to do something different. So we have to start thinking about thought leadership or content, we called it insight, that is designed specifically to drive behavior change. And in my mind, when you start thinking about that kind of content, it's not about one thing, how smart we are. It's about 2 things. It's about a current state and a future or a preferred state. And the whole idea is not just to talk about that new state or the preferred state, but to talk about that current state, to break that down. I call it the A state and the B state. This is why the new company I'm building is called the A to B Insights. It's all about this A to B. It's like, before you build up the B of the future state, you've got to break down the A. You've got to show your customers why what they're currently doing is costing them money, exposing them to risk they haven't fully appreciated. Otherwise, they'll say, that B state's amazing. It's so great. I want me some of that B state, but it's expensive and it's hard and it's unknown. So for now, while the B state's better than my A state, the A state for now will have to be good enough. And this is why we keep losing over and over again, not to the competition, but to good enough. It's because we haven't knocked them off the A state. We haven't shown them that the pain of same is greater than the pain of change, as our friends at ADP used to say. And so when I think of what I would call insight, which we in the Challenger Customer we laid out as a subset of thought leadership, is that it's a specific flavor of thought leadership that is specifically to break down A's, build up B's, and drive change, and not simply to say, hey, look at my smart thinking. Aren't I smart? That's 2. The third is somewhere around 2015. I don't know if you agree. It's probably about the time you got, like, you launched your company, Bob. But somewhere I did actually keynote just yesterday where I said this, and there was a head of marketing there. She's totally nodded her head. So this is so true. I said about 2015, some morning, sometime in the spring, every CEO in the world woke up on the same morning, looked in the mirror, and said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to become a thought leader, right? So they all decided we're having a hard time differentiating. We're having a hard time standing on the marketplace. We're having a hard time getting premium pricing for our solutions. So it's the same as this guy had mentioned at the big company, right? It's like, we're going to become a thought leader. And so they all kind of woke up with the same mandate, the same idea at the same time. By the way, this is right about the time Challenger hit. So it was lightning in a bottle. We just hit the market perfectly timed. But what's funny is when all these CEOs start saying we need to be a thought leader, all the marketers in the world woke up and said, I can do something about that. And they built a strategy. That strategy is called content marketing. And all of a sudden, a company out of Boston called HubSpot woke up and said, I've got software for that. It's called marketing automation. So now I've got technology to make good on a strategy to help create an outcome. And so we all just started creating massive amounts of content in the name of thought leadership and just started spamming the world with how smart we are. I call this the smartness arms race. And just like the actual arms race, the smartness arms race ended in a tie where everybody's saying really smart things and they're backed by data and backed by research. But the whole point of going on the journey in the first place was to create differentiation. And here we are now 10 years later, and we all look the same. We just look smarter and the same. And so there's an article we wrote for HBR called Sense Making for Sales. And Sense Making for Sales breaks this idea down. And this is what I'm writing the book about now too, is that the way you stand out in this world isn't to be even more thought leadery, right? Or even to say even smarter stuff or to say even more things. It's to help customers just make sense out of all the content that's already out there. They're overwhelmed with more information. And there's not just high quantities of information, but high quantities of high quality information. So it can't just be make my information even better, have a better sample size, have better research. You're already well above the good enough threshold on the quality of content. The problem isn't the quality, it's the quantity of the quality. And so the solution here isn't that so if you show up in this world, this is, I think, now the downside of Challenger today that was not the downside of Challenger 12 years ago. If you show up today with an insight, as good as it may be designed and as well intended as it may be, your customer's going to be great. I'll put it on the stack of the 13 other videos and the 5 other white papers I got to read, and I'll get to that at some point, but I'm just kind of overwhelmed. If someone could just help me make sense of all of it, that would be so much better. So I think that is a limitation of thought leadership today that wasn't true 10 years ago. And finally, this ties into the last bit, and they're all kind of related, is that the single biggest challenge, and this is what I'm writing the book about, the single biggest challenge and opportunity that we have today in B2B is not customers' lack of confidence in you, the supplier. It's customers' lack of confidence in themselves and their ability to make a large-scale decision on behalf of their company. There's a lot of data we have and a lot of research behind this, that the single biggest obstacle for customers making these big decisions is not that they don't trust you, it's that they don't trust themselves and their ability to navigate their decision-making process, their ability to find value, their ability just to get agreement with their colleagues. And so if you come into this environment and say, hey, look how smart we are, it's not even like a knife to a gunfight. It's like literally you've just entered the wrong party. It's like this is so not the problem to solve right now. So if thought leadership is all about, hey, do you think I'm smart? Are you confident in me? We want to be a thought leader. We want to be a trusted advisor. You're solving for customers' trust in you, which is necessary. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's woefully insufficient when the bigger problem is customers' lack of confidence in themselves. And this is the whole book. This is the reframe of the whole thing, which is, what if we start thinking about the way we interact with customers from this perspective of not solving their perceptions of us, but solving their perceptions of themselves? And all of a sudden, this at least original definition of thought leadership starts to wobble pretty significantly as being the right answer. So there's my soapbox moment. So you asked me what I'm doing today. I'm writing that book. That's what I'm doing these days.
Well, that sounds exciting. That sounds really exciting.
Do you buy that? I mean, you've got a company called Thought Leadership. Do you feel attacked? I don't want you to be, but I mean,
no. I mean, I have a different definition of thought leadership.
I figured that's what you'd say. If you start with a different definition, then a lot of these problems go away. But if you look at common practice of what's being done in the name of thought leadership, that's what I'm picking a beef with.
Most thought leadership content is not thoughtful or leading, and so
right. Yeah.
But if you put that label on it, then you get, funding from the corporation to go ahead. I look at thought leadership. Ultimately, the value of thought leadership, as I look at it, is the company doing the research that they hope will lead to a totally new way to solve a very complex problem.
Yeah.
But the ultimate value of that research is, in my mind, is the development and delivery of a service, a consulting service, or if you're in a law firm, a new legal practice, or accounting firm, a new accounting practice, or training development firm, a new training practice, a service that you use with clients that has an order of magnitude impact, beneficial, of course.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Thought leadership research, as I look at it, is really the fuel for service innovation in professional services. And beyond, and maybe even in tech services. Leadership should be the fuel of service innovation, of breakthrough services. So the Challenger sale, you guys had a training company, right, that you spun off before Gartner.
That's right. Yep.
So that's an example in my mind. All right, you turned the Challenger research into a service. Great. Re-engineering turned into a consulting service. Michael Hammer didn't do much consulting. Yep. He ran a couple of research companies.
Six Sigma, all that kind of stuff. That's 100% right. Yeah. It's funny because going full circle back to our conversation about CEB, early on when we started really getting good at this, that was our big problem is we go out, we present these really big, reframe, powerful ideas that were so valuable, and companies are looking to say, great, so can you help us do that? We say, no, we're just a research company. So we walked away from millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of implementation support. We taught them how to do things different. We taught them that they need to do things differently, but didn't provide the support to do that. That's when Challenger hit. That's why we stood, like someone on the team said, why walk away from this? We should be the ones that actually follow on with training. So we built the training business. I geeked out over on the research side, but colleagues built the training business that eventually spun off. And that thing was doing, $60 million a year of revenue by the time we spun it out.
I bet you without knowing, you could have built a much bigger consulting business around.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
My definition of thought leadership is it's the evidence that a company achieves by developing the kind of research that you did and delivering and marketing. You have to market your new way to, organize the sales force, new way to sell, new way to design the operations of the business, i.e. re-engineering. You have to market this, right? And then sell this new way of doing it. But the most important part of it is delivering it.
Yeah.
delivering it at a consistent level of quality so that you don't burn through the Fortune 500 because your consulting team that you built around Challenger sale, they're feeling at every other company that brings you in, right?
100%. I totally agree. And see, this is, by the way, my personal challenge. No one cares about my personal challenge. My challenge is like, once you get into that part of the business, Bob, I'm kind of bored. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I need to surround myself with other people who are good at that and want to do that and find value in that. Because I'm kind of like, so can you come train me? Because I'll do it for a little while, but there's like, I kind of want to get back to that thing where I'm creating the next new thing. So it takes a village. It takes a team to do this well, doesn't it?
It takes a team. And I've thought about this a lot. And I saw it go wrong at the CSC Index, where we have a very good internal training and development function, have a very good methodology development function to take these wonderful ideas. Business reengineering was the blockbuster idea that came out of this multi-company sponsored research service.
Yeah.
To take these wonderful ideas that Mike Hammer and his research team of 3 or 4 people, depending on what you talk about, somebody to grind this into methodology. Your research people don't want to do this.
No.
And somebody to rounded down methodology into an internal training and development.
Right. And then someone's got to sell it and someone's got to renew it. And of course, people have to deliver it. It's like, and the other thing is that can't all be the same person, that because there are different peaks and valleys on the skyline of capability, but it also is just capacity that you need, right? This is like, you can't be delivering and renewing and keeping people happy and serving, and also do the hard work of these big debates where you're in conference rooms debating the leap out of ideas, right? It's just like, at some point you just run out of time, capacity. And this is why and that's why all of a sudden you start, okay, I need more people. And that's like, and that's where it starts getting expensive, right? So it's a real catch-22. And I think that's why sometimes these businesses aren't super sustainable at larger scale, because of this challenge and the fact that some of these skills are pretty rare. It's a rare group of people that really geek out on just finding these big ideas and want to do that in the context of business as opposed to academics. Anyway.
I wonder if it begins with saying, why are we doing thought leadership research? Well, we're doing it not just to throw big ideas and open up doors and hopefully sell. We're doing it for service innovation. We're doing it to develop new consulting services, or if you're in a law firm, new legal services or a tech services firm. We want people to rethink how they should use generative AI. And so we studied 50 companies.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Doing this because we want to sell something new, not we want to sell this thing we're already selling more. Right?
Well, if we define the goal as we want to help companies implement these new ideas, proven through the research, looking at best practice and worst practice, understanding the differences between best practice and worst practice, but codifying it into a method and delivering it as a service. Our goal is to move companies from where they are to where they could be. The goal is not just to deliver a breakthrough concept that we get an HBR article.
You know what it feels like we just landed in? Feels like we just landed in the innovator's dilemma, though, right? Because it's what you're describing is kind of a skunk works to create the next brand extension, the next capability, the next product. And it's like, again, the margins on there are just by definition lower than just stamping out more of the thing we're already doing, isn't it? So again, this is why I think you and I personally look at this, like, why isn't there more of this? Because we love it. And I think it's Christensen just nailed it. I think he got it right in a lot of ways, didn't he?
He did. Most consulting firms have not connected thought leadership to service innovation.
Yeah.
Think, we got this Thought Leadership Institute, Research Institute, and we the consultants, this is marketing content,
Thought leadership is marketing content. No, it's actually business innovation. That's your point, right? And it's a very different way of looking at it.
It's service innovation. And the big thing to tell whether a large professional firm is regarding thought leadership as marketing content or service innovation content is, well, who does the head of thought leadership report to? If it's to the CMO, it's going to be looked upon by consultants or the lawyers or whatever firm you're talking about. It's being looked at, this is marketing content.
Yeah, 100%.
Bunch of fluff. Okay, we're not going to change the way we practice, but if the head of thought leadership reports to the top of the company or not to the CMO and has good relationships with the CMO and head of service delivery, service innovation, then thought leadership is positioned right. That's my experience.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah, I'd agree with you. By the way, my goal right now in my life is to never work for someone again. But if someone's got that job, I'll take it. Because that'd be a cool one, right? So it's a really interesting way to think about it. And I ultimately figured you and I are pretty aligned on these kinds of topics. I think we are. But I think as a result, you must be that much more frustrated to be seeing what's being done in the name of thought leadership, because a lot of it is not what you're talking about, is it?
Most of it is not.
Yeah.
Most of it is not. And most of it, even the great stuff, in most cases that I've seen, doesn't lead to service innovation. It leads to an HBR article or writing a best-selling book or getting keynote speeches, but not other people in the firm adopting this new and better way to do whatever, and delivering a breakthrough consulting is what it's about.
Cool. We've solved the world's problems, Bob.
That's right. In about 60 minutes or so.
Look at that.
And we have to develop a service around it, right? We can't just be spouting ideas. We actually have to practice.
No, see, that's the difference between you and me, because I'm good.
I'm good with the ideas. Right.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Right.
And somebody else.
Somebody pay me, and you're like, no one's going to pay you for that. That's my problem. That's amazing.
Brent,
I can still feed my family at all.
This has been
Pleasure.
terrific.
Agreed.
So much for your time. We are going to have to bring you back because I think there's so much more we could talk about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. Cheers.
There's so much to learn from Brent Adamson for all thought leadership professionals, especially thought leadership researchers, about how to work with a team of researchers, push them to think harder, to think outside the box, to come up with novel insights about a problem in the world and a better way to solve it, and not just settle for something that's incrementally different than what others have said. I hope this episode of Everything Thought Leadership shows thought leadership researchers and thought leadership marketers what it takes for a research team to come up with truly compelling insights that break the mold. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left a like and if you shared the episode with your colleagues. Everything Thought Leadership is a video and podcast series from Buday TLP. It's for thought leaders and thought leadership professionals, the people who help experts get recognized as thought leaders. You can find out more about Buday Thought Leadership Partners at budaytlp.com.